As you all know, VMware's acquisition by Broadcom didn't just raise prices, it also shattered trust. Enterprises who were logged into proprietary virtualization are now facing licensing overhauls, unpredictable cost, and a vendor relationship that no longer feels like a partnership. The exit door is open, but most IT leaders don't know what is waiting on the other side. Vates does. They have been quietly building a fully open source virtualization platform for over a decade, and the US is now their largest and fastest growing market. And to talk about what they're working on today, we have with us Olivier Lambert, CEO and co-founder of Vates, and we are going to dig into what this moment really means for enterprises and the whole enterprise infrastructure. Olivier, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
It's my pleasure. You have been building this company for over a decade, long before this Broadcom acquisition happened. But that acquisition clearly changed the conversation. Walk us through what you are actually hearing from enterprises right now. What is driving them to finally make a move?
Yeah, I think the first signal we started to hear was back in 2022 when Broadcom made the first announcement, but it wasn't official until 2023. But we started to hear as a software virtualization company, software vendor, many people started to come to us. And what's funny is we started to hear noise from the US first. I think it's because, the US market is very well aware about who is Broadcom exactly. And since then, in the last, few years, 3 years, it's like a constant flow of people trying to seek to get out of VMware because of the pricing, which is the main, driver to seek for an exit. But as you told in the introduction, it's a question of trust, a broken trust with them more than a pricing question. It was brutal, and now we see that around half of those, VMware customers are seeking to get out of VMware in the end.
Now, when enterprises hear open source and license free, the instinct is often to ask, what's the catch? Also with when you talk about proprietary and there is a free and fee, you're like, there's a throat to choke. And also the word free itself, open source. Now things have changed, but initially there was a lot of issue. Now everybody's aware of open source. Everybody actually leans towards open source more than proprietary. But what are the biggest misconceptions that you have to clear up before a real conversation can even start when you talk about alternatives?
Well, it's kind of very different than, I would say, even 10 years ago. It's like, I would say we have two pillars. Right now, we have the open source community, the users that are very, playing with a machine in their garage and so on. We're not trying to sell anything to them. They are ambassadors and so on. They are very well aware about what is open source and so on. And the other pillar is people coming from VMware. And yes, they are not really used to open source. But frankly, when they come to us, the open source question is like maybe the third or fourth question. The first one is, the cost and the expertise on the migration. They don't really care about the fundamental of, open source. Sure, they know we are. They know that, we are controlling the way we build the platform. We made the security reports and so on. And for them, it's, good enough, or even a security against a potential trust problem that you had with proprietary software. Because even if for whatever reason the company disappeared or being acquired, the existing code has to stay there. So frankly, I was kind of surprised in the right way that open source is not an obstacle on the decision to migrate out of VMware. It's more like, are you able to help us to make the migration? Is your product working? Is it like turnkey? I think that's maybe the main concern about open source, because you could have open source, very complex open source that you need to build everything yourself. But if you build a turnkey product, they don't really care about that. It's not a problem, at least.
How does XCP-ng and Xen Orchestra stand out from competitors?
So roughly speaking, what's funny is the core engine of XCP-ng is Xen, and it's almost the same age as ESXi. And in a way, those two platforms, the VMware one and the Vates one, is kind of similar in terms of architecture. Instead of ESXi from one side, you got XCP-ng, and instead of vCenter, you got Xen Orchestra. So it's kind of nobody got 100% of all the features of VMware because it's like the best virtualization product feature-wise with the most advanced R&D, and there's no question about this. But the thing is, most of the customers, more than 50%, aren't using all the bells and whistles of VMware, and they are forced to get to the highest plan, the one with absolutely everything they don't need. So they're seeking to do something else, and that's why I think the platform we have, the virtualization stack, the orchestration layer, one of the main differentiators is the fact it's bundled into one solution. So you don't have to get even the backup solution from outside. You can use our backup solution if you want to back up your own XCP-ng VMs. If you want a hypervisor backup, sure, you will go to Veeam and so on and so on. But for, I would say, the essential stuff, you can have everything into one turnkey solution. So the fact we are both open source and, unlike, I would say, classical open source, pretty much turnkey and scalable for even, hundreds and hundreds of even few thousand of hosts makes sense for them. And obviously pricing is a big differentiator as we price per physical host and not per socket or per memory and so on. So all those differentiators, and also to be fair, we hire people coming from VMware because, they are getting out of the company since the Broadcom acquisition. And VMware was a very nice company before, especially toward the employees. And now with Broadcom, it's completely different. And so they are removing all the best, things they had before. So they want to keep finding a similar culture. And so some of them are coming to Vates, and they are really helpful because, sometimes even VMware users find back their technical account manager they had with VMware, but they find it back at Vates. So it's kind of, you never leave the family or something like that, because as I said, trust is probably the biggest currency right now in that, market of getting out of VMware. They want to trust a company, they want to trust a product, and this is what we are doing. So to be fair, I'm an engineer, so I would say it hurts a bit to say that, but the product is maybe not the main reason people are migrating to our solution. It's because everything around the capability to help them to make the migration is, I think, a very important point.
And in most cases, honestly, because every product that you look, and that's why we have so many vendors, otherwise there'll be only one vendor. There are a lot of gaps. That's why other vendor comes in, they fill the gap. So product is never the big thing. It's sometimes that platform becomes part of your culture. You're so used to it. So even if there are some flaws, you will still continue with that. Trust is there. Sometimes you are willing to make little bit compromises because you trust the ecosystem, you trust the player itself. So yes, those things are there. Now let's talk about migration, because that is where the deals get stuck. What should enterprises realistically expect when they make the move away from a traditional proprietary virtualization platform, and how does Vates make that less painful?
Yeah, a very good question. And in fact, I think the best way to answer it is to give you an example on how we already did hundreds of migration from now. So the kind of the average profile of people, the way they are doing migration. So usually they are trying, those enterprise customers, to, let's say, juggle between two main risks. There's the financial risk of staying at VMware, and there's the technological risk to leave VMware to something else, because those people were using VMware for the last 20 years or so. So they are very used to the product. They don't want to relearn something from scratch. So the product has to work easily as a turnkey product. So the way migration is done is usually they don't even repurchase new hardware. They just, let's say, migrate VMs on a smaller number of physical hosts. So they raise the density on the VMware side, which is leaving some, free hosts to reinstall something else. They will reuse that hardware that is free now from VMware to install our stack. They will test it. They will do a POC on top of it. And when they're happy with the POC, they will start to migrate the less critical virtual machines to the ex-POC now new production thing. And then it will grow slower and slower, but it will grow from the small, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 machines to 15, 20, 30, 50, 100, and sometimes replacing everything, sometimes not. I mean, when you have a very critical part of your infrastructure that you must trust 24/7 and you are used to it in the last 20 years with VMware, you can keep, I don't know, 10% of your infrastructure maybe on VMware. You made it. I mean, you solve the financial risks that I told you first, and you also mitigate the technological risk. So that's how we enter those very large enterprise customers, is first by getting a small part of the infrastructure and growing then while they are going from the less critical to the more and more critical part of the stack. So this is, I would say, the safe way that is done by many of our customers. Some are more aggressive. We could talk about, companies with very limited budgets like universities and so on. They had to escape VMware immediately. So they are being, let's say, more, bolder on the way they are migrating. But the principle is always the same. So you migrate from your VMware stack to our stack. We got a V2V tool, Vates, VMware to Vates thing that is connecting to the API of your ESXi or vCenter. You just, tick the boxes of the VM you want to migrate, and then you migrate it. Then you wait a bit. You are not removing the original VMs that are staying, shut down on the VMware side. And for a few weeks, you are expecting some results and see if your users are complaining of anything and so on. And if it's fine, then you are moving forward with the rest of the infrastructure. So that's a very, I would say, pragmatic approach, which is very much like less critical to more critical, and then decide to replace entirely or not the VMware infrastructure.
Now, you have had over 500 enterprise customers running this in production in the US already. What does that base tells you about where the market is heading in the next 2 to 3 years?
I think it's not the end of the wave right now. I would say maybe we're closing to the top of it, but many, consulting firms like Gartner and so on are expecting half of those customers leaving. And what's really impressive, and it's not just within the US, even if the US market is the first one, we're selling in all the countries in the world, but the US market is the fastest to move. Also, probably the one that is more keen to take risks to get out of VMware faster than maybe more conservative, in Europe, for example. But still, there is a constant, inbound of people coming to us every day about asking how to escape VMware. So I think it's not even decelerating yet now. So maybe we are close to the peak, but I think that in 1 or 2 years, we'll reach the peak of the active project of migrations. Within Europe, might be in the next 3 or 5 years, because again, it's a bit slower to keep the pace there. But that's the ballpark numbers we're seeing right now.
I also want to talk about the market as well. These days, a lot of, because of the global politics, geopolitical war crisis going on, a lot of countries, they are looking at tech sovereignty, AI sovereignty, data sovereignty, cloud sovereignty. Sovereign clouds are coming up, but they are mostly owned by US companies. Either way, what does that mean for Vates?
So for the US markets, it's more seen from the being resilient angle. So making sure as an IT person within a big corporation to make sure you're not rely only on one player, which was the case before the Broadcom acquisition. So I think people realize that sourcing your IT software is in fact like sourcing, I don't know, steel or anything that you do within the regular industry. So I think it was kind of a reminder that sourcing is critical, and you be able to not have only maybe one player. So that's why some of them want to keep VMware. Some of them are getting to 2 different, companies to source their virtualization platform and so on. Some are, using another Kubernetes platform while keeping the virtualization platform to make sure, it's not relying only on one player. That's for the US. For the Europe part of the world, there is another angle, which is obviously the fact that reducing the dependency on extra European companies. That's why we're seeing a pretty fast acceleration right now on the market, on the European market. And if now 60% is within the US, we think that in like 3 or 4 years, it will be a balance with the European Union, which is, as I said, first a bit slower to get it. But when they decide to, focus on something, another differentiator that we have as being a French company, that makes things very exciting for potential growth within Europe.
The issue with open source is that open source solves day one problem very easily. You get it installed, you download it, you get started. Day two is where the issue start creeping up. And second is that a lot of open source companies, they're running a business, so there has to be a commercial aspect as well. Without commercialization, open source will not succeed. It will not be successful. It will be a part-time charity, which is not what we're looking at. And also, modern times, things have changed. Not everybody is working in their free time. People are getting paid to do their job on open source. How does Vates stay commercially sustainable while also supporting and keeping as much code as possible into open source?
That's a very good question. And I think we're kind of lucky at Vates for many reasons, because first, if you are a customer coming from VMware, there is no way you won't pay anything to be supported for your critical part of the infrastructure. You've been paying VMware for the last 20 years, and it's normal to have support if you have a problem. And again, we are not addressing the existing open source community. I mean, they won't pay anything, and that's fine. That's not where we want to survive. It would be impossible to survive if we were only targeting that. Again, it's a plus, but the main target we have are those VMware customers, and for them, it's not even something that could be thought about, not paying anything and having the responsibility internally to maintain and to solve bugs. So for us, even if we just are fully open source, you can download it. There is no restriction. It's not even open core. It's fully open. But what we are selling, in fact, is the expertise on the code we are producing. Not the code itself, because you can copy it, use it, whatever. But as it's a very critical part of your infrastructure, as it's not a SaaS calendar application or whatnot, it is running your entire infrastructure. So it's too critical to not have support, especially if you come from VMware where you had this kind of support. So for us, the open source business is kind of not a problem, commercially speaking. So we have best of both worlds. We could do everything in open source like the way we want, but we sell the expertise on the code we built. So that's a very, I would say, sane model. We are aligned. We want to make sure everything works well for everyone, because if it does, then we have less support tickets in the end. So everyone is incentive in the right way to make sure they pay us for us to improve the software, and for us to improve the software to reduce the amount of problems. So we are fully aligned with our customers, even as being fully open source.
Oliver, thank you so much. This has been really fantastic conversation, to talk about that. Of course, we do cover a lot of VMware alternatives, where the market is heading, and it's always good to see more solutions, fully baked solution, and that too on top of open source. So thank you so much for joining today. And for anybody who's watching, and anybody who's watching who wants to learn more, please head over to Vates.io and explore the platform. Oliver, it was a great discussion, and I look forward to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.